Hello, sword nerds. Welcome. Going to talk about this Jian here by Ryan Sword. This Jian is called the Roaring Dragon Jian. And I'm sure my pronunciation is just wonderful. Check out that dragon right there. Pretty cool. I think this is a very attractive sword with very attractive fittings. So I only paid 225 bucks for this sword. I love the little faces on it. To me, they look like angry owls. Angry owl. But I really love those designs. I think they're elegant and gorgeous. The fittings are just really well done. The scabbard, beautiful wood grain pattern. Really well done too. Just really great craftsmanship for 225 bucks. I believe this one is out of stock at the moment. All right, hold on just a second. I'll take it out and we'll look at the blade. All right, here we are with the blade. So $225 sword here. And I don't know if you can, how well you can see that on the video, but this sword has just a really lovely pattern welded blade. Just a really gorgeous pattern, quote unquote Damascus, though of course in technical terms that's not really the accurate thing to call this, but it is beautiful. Now this sword is a Han style Jian that I would call a historical fantasy Jian, maybe right on the line with historically plausible. The overall scabbard design and hilt design and blade geometry are from the late Warring States period and part of the Han dynasty. This would be roughly Alexander the Great, maybe a little later, like 100, 200 BC, I think. I'm not a real expert on Chinese swords, but that's what I think is correct. Anyway, so the sword blade geometry is pretty interesting. It has this really stiff central ridge. Then it dips into a really steep hollow grind, and then it widens up right at the edge and forms a thick bevel before narrowing down to the final edge. Another way that you could describe that is the sword has two massive deep fullers that extend the entire length of the blade. So when I first got this sword, the original, you hear me like licking something, it's because I cut the crap out of my hand using a rag to get a polishing compound off the edge that had gotten stuck on there when I was sharpening it, and then it cut through the rag into my finger. Because what I did was I reprofiled this edge. It was way too thick for doing any kind of fine cutting. I cut it according to the original bevel, and then I decided to narrow it down to more like a 20-degree bevel to see if it'll cut better, because it was not cutting very well on that original bevel. Now the sword does have a decent amount of distal taper. It is pretty thick down here, and it does thin out a good bit. It is not a light sword, but it is not an unwieldable sword either. So we'll go to the cutting stand and see how that works out. Okay, so as I was saying about this sword, it's not super light, but it's not too heavy for a single-handed sword. It still has good, nice and wieldable balance about up there, as you can see. Not too bad. This kind of blade, you know, sometimes swords that have a strong blade presence, we have a prejudice kind of against them in a modern backyard kind of cutting and collecting, because when we see those swords and we wield them, we're like, you know, that doesn't feel the greatest for, you know, kind of unarmored dueling type of swordsmanship. But fighting in heavy armor, where you need a sword blade that can take some abuse and that can deal out percussive damage as well as cutting damage, and you know, this sword does have some flex, but it's quite stiff for the thrust. And so I think this sword will work really well in armor. This particular one, I'm not saying that's the specific purpose of this type of sword in general. I mean, even among European swords, you can find certain types that are made to fight in armor that have great variation in the specific geometry of the blade. Like I have a type 17 that is a great cutter, but I've also seen type 17s that were basically just estics, that were just, you know, bar maces with a point on the end. So you can have that kind of variation, I think. So let's see if this sword, this beefy sucker, this robust blade can cut. Well, now that I reprofiled the edge, I guess it can. Cool. Let's get ambitious. Let's see if we can make a double cut. Cool. Let's try an upward cut. Cool. Let's try one with the false edge, the top edge. Cool. Let's see. What if we try a downward false edge? Got a taste of it there. Baseball bat. Let's see. You know, when I use a single-handed sword, I find that cutting from the inside out is often more powerful, where using two hands, often from the outside in, feels like the more powerful cut. And that is one nice thing about a sword. A lot of Asian style swords, that instead of having a big giant pommel on them to counterbalance them, they simply have a longer handle. Is you have a whole lot of swords that are essentially hand and a half swords, or swords that can be used two-handed if you want to. And this sword definitely fits into that category. So, I mean, now that I've got the blade reprofiled how I like it, beautiful pattern welded blade, beautiful fittings, 225 bucks. Man, I think, you know, Ryan Sword did a great job with this. So, cool sword.